Okay, as promised, welcome to the webcast today, everyone. Thank you so much for participating today. We've had quite an overwhelming response from the marketplace on today's topic of culture, which is encouraging that it's recognized as such an important driver of business in today's economy. This is part of our series of webcast content that we're providing on behalf of The List to our customer base and to the industry, the marketing and advertising industry as a whole, as part of our education series, where we invite experts to present on a range of topics, and one of those we have with you today. So today's topic is your culture can be your competitive advantage, and this was a presentation that I saw last year at an agency conference in Portland with the TAN network, and then which was later then presented by Pat in conjunction with the 4As in November. I'd like to introduce Pat Doody, a good friend of mine, cultural guru, Seattle native, co-founder and president of the agency WONGDOODY, today who is a consultant, coach, and fan with a little-known athletic aspiration and ability. In the 6th grade, Pat was the free throw champion in the city of Chicago. So that was actually the pinnacle of Pat's athletic ability and prowess. Nonetheless, a great coach and fan, and today's presenter on culture and the impact it can have. Pat.
Thank you, Dave. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. Thank you for joining us today, and I'm pleased to be talking a little bit about culture and not at all about free throws. I think you'd be pleased as well if I stuck to that script. So, as a way of a little bit of background and context, Tracy Wong and I founded our agency, aptly named WONGDOODY, in 1993. When we started, it was literally just the two of us. We had an office without a door. We had no clients. We had no decent prospects. We had no revenue. And our wives, frankly, thought we had no hope. 20 years later, WONGDOODY was 150 employees in Seattle and in Los Angeles. We were doing $25 million annually in revenue, and we had been profitable in every one of our 20 years. And we were pretty much self-financed. We borrowed money from the bank only twice in 20 years. In 2013, Ad Age awarded us the Small Agency of the Year for agencies in the 75 to 150 employee size. So, you know, that's not too shabby. We'll take that. The fact that we are still standing after 20 years and they are still standing after 22 years is an achievement in and of itself, I guess. But I know that we all know agencies that are much bigger, richer, taller, stronger, handsomer, faster, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. In fact, some of them are no doubt on the phone with us today. We were not a Godzilla in size, but the point is that we did enjoy some success. And more to the point, both Tracy and I have stated publicly and believe deeply that the single biggest determinant of our success, such as it was our company culture. We carefully built that culture, and it paid rich dividends. My contention is that your culture can truly be a competitive advantage because it's a real tool of productivity. But alas, I also contend that cultures are way too often misunderstood, underestimated, left to their own devices. By that I mean people think that cultures just sort of sprout organically, or they're simply entirely overlooked. And that results in them being corporate orphans. I think that's a shame and a really wasted, valuable asset, because I believe your culture is more powerful and more important than your brand. So, when we talk about cultures here, cultures start with founders, owners, or leaders of companies. If it doesn't start with them, the seeds never really get planted, the important values don't get modeled, the tree never grows to maturity. It just doesn't happen. After leaders get it started, it's critically important that managers and employees embrace the values and carry forth with the prescribed behaviors. So they are key to this as well. But much of this presentation has to do with the initial formation of a culture. So much of this presentation will be directed at, or will directly address, owners and founders or current company leaders. This is not meant to imply that the employee's role isn't vital, but in the formation of a culture, Employees follow the leader, so to speak. So this presentation reflects the initial and oversized role that owners have in this vital task of building a culture. Now, one final point before I dive into it. This is a picture of me, and I show this for two specific reasons. One is I know that everybody likes a little eye candy when it comes to a presentation. And two, if my wife were here today, she would want to warn you that when I give presentations, sometimes I can get a little preachy, especially about things that I feel passionate about. I feel very passionate about the importance of cultures. I feel very passionately about the fact that I think they are misunderstood and underutilized. So this will be the last time that I apologize for being preachy, but watch out, we're about to go there. So let's start at the end. Why have a culture? What will a culture do for you, if anything? Well, I believe they do a lot. I believe that strong, intentional cultures can and will produce overall workplace excellence. They will produce better business results. They will produce happier, healthy employees, including you, Mr. or Ms. Owner, Leader, Founder. Again, strong, intentional cultures can produce overall workplace excellence, better business results, happier, healthy employees. I think if that happens, when that happens, you can see how this could be, in fact, a competitive advantage. My opinion about the power of cultures, I don't hold that just by myself. There was a recent study by the Bain Company that was conducted among 1,200 C-suite executives from global companies. 91% of them agreed with the statement that culture was just as important as strategy in achieving business success. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I would bet there wasn't any other single statement that 91% agreed on. One of the people that was told in this survey was the CEO of a large international pharma company, and he went beyond this when he said, the fact is, culture eats strategy for lunch. He said, you can have a good strategy in place, but if you don't have the culture and the enabling systems that allow you to successfully implement that strategy, the poor culture of the organization will defeat the strategy. To repeat, you can have a good strategy in place, but if you don't have the culture and the enabling systems that allow you to successfully implement that strategy, the poor culture of the organization will defeat the strategy. So, based on my 20 years experience of building WONGDOODY, and based on this Bain study and others that I've read, and the work that I've done in the last couple of years with various small companies and their cultures, I think it's entirely reasonable to extrapolate and to conclude that truly inspired company cultures can make for great, enviable workplaces. They can make for competitive advantages. Strong cultures can very much so make a workplace where the employees might eagerly admit that this is the best job I've ever had. Now, let's stop here and think for a minute about this idea, this concept of the best job I've ever had. If you took this all the way to bright, as they say, if you ran a company where, let's say that the majority, let's say 70% of your employees thought this was truly the best job they ever had, what do you think some of the implications of that would be? Well, I think the implications would be huge. I think that some of those implications would be greater productivity. That's a pretty obvious benefit, but maybe you'll see that some more as we review the next benefits. I think that you would have, if the majority of your employees thought it was the best job they've ever had, you'd have fewer sick days. Employees who love their jobs don't get mysteriously sick on Mondays. Less office politics. What's to grouse about if you truly love your job and the person sitting next to you truly loves their job? Happier, healthier employees. You love your work, there's reduced stress, you're getting true satisfaction, better attitudes all around the block, creates less turnover. People don't leave the best job they've ever had. Turnover is the enemy of productivity. How about easier recruiting? How much time do you spend in money recruiting people when it's a crapshoot? People want to work at that company that their friend truly loves and crows about all the time. Plus the fact your employees will become good recruiters for you because they won't bring somebody into the company that they don't think is a good fit. Better teamwork. Consistently greater morale. I'm getting ahead of myself. Better teamwork. People get along better at great workplaces and they produce more. Happier, healthier you. Now I'm speaking to you, Mr. Owner or Mr. Leader. How much time does an owner spend with unhappy or unproductive employees? Too much. More self-policing. Employees will call out the bad apples because the bad apples bring the place down, and happy, satisfied employees won't put up with that with their workplace. Happier spouses. Yes, believe it or not, if you love your job, you don't go home and kick the dog. In fact, you do just the opposite. You go home and report good things about work. You walk in the door at home gratified, not grumpy. That has an impact on the home life. All this adds up to more profitability. Great cultures produce great workplaces where people love their jobs. And when people love their jobs, it produces all of these things. In a recent Monster.com study, companies with winning cultures reported 30% less turnover than their industry average. And interestingly, new applicants will accept up to 8% lower salaries because of the attractiveness of the culture at the new workplace. Wow. Would you take a lower salary to work at the place that has a killer culture? What are your priorities? What's your current level of job satisfaction? Company cultures have been studied by academicians and behavioral scientists since at least the 50s. But I believe the vast majority of business leaders are a bit tone deaf about it, or a bit self-delusional. My experience in the last 3 years has been that I run across owners all the time who think they have a good culture, but they can't point to specific things that they've done to achieve that. And more often than not, their employees don't feel the same way about the culture that they do. Sadly, culture is a business lever for productivity that few CEOs have well enough in hand to pull. Tim Coupler is a consultant who does quite a bit of work around company cultures. He has a blog, he's written a bunch of books on culture. His latest one is entitled Build the Culture Advantage. He cites a Booz Allen study where 96% of employees said that their cultures needed work. 96% of people thought that the culture, such as they are, needed work. Frankly, I'm surprised that 96% of people even thought that they had a culture. There are measurements out there for whether you have a culture or not. I think there's a very practical and surefire one, though, about whether a company has a strong culture or not. And it's called the Sunday Blues, a very reliable day in and day out metric. Now, if I could see you, if I was standing up in front of you, I'd ask people to raise their hands and ask them if they've ever gotten or still get the Sunday Blues. It's America's most widespread influenza. I would bet 3/4 of the hands are up, and the quarter that are down, I think you people are not being truthful. It's also called the blue flu. Studies show it's highly contagious, that around 4 to 6 p.m. on Sunday evenings, resulting in an inordinate amount of Monday sick days. You'd be amazed at the incidence of flu or colds on a Monday. Statistically, Monday should account for probably 20% of all sick days, but I believe that's almost 35%, a 60%, 70% greater incidence than statistically warranted. The Sunday blues are a very real malady. We all suffer from it from time to time. Sometimes it's almost terminal. Unfortunately, it's way worse than just the Sunday blues. For at least the last 10 years, the Gallup organization has conducted an annual global survey on what they call worker engagement. You know, it's basically a job satisfaction measurement. The way Gallup defines engagement is that the worker is mentally committed to their work and they are likely to be making positive contributions to their organization. That's the threshold. That's the bar that Gallup wants to get over. They want to find out if people are mentally committed to their work, so I guess that means you don't fall asleep at your desk or come to work stoned, and you're likely to be making positive contributions to the organization. Not too big a bar. These are the results for 2013. American workers self-reported in 2013, 72% of American workers said they were not engaged. 18%, almost 1 in 5, were actively disengaged, which means they were having a deliberate negative effect on their organizations. I think these results are staggering, depressing, and ominous. We spend up to half of our waking hours at our jobs, and for the most part, they bring us no reward. We're not, and again, Gallup is just measuring whether people are engaged. It has nothing to do with do you love your job? Are you getting gratification from your job? Think about that. The concept of people actually wanting to come into work every day. They don't get the Sunday blues because their work actually gratifies them. That's the real litmus test. Is your work truly gratifying? That's a nirvana. That's a hard place to get. There are people who like their jobs but don't necessarily get gratification. Do you enjoy going to work because you are valued and valuable? If so, congratulations. If you don't get the Sunday blues, if you enjoy going into work, if you're finding job gratification, you're in the minority. And you probably should be join the ranks of Walt Disney and his pals, who 50 years ago do you whistle on your way to work? Do you sing on your way to work? I'm not asking for that. But it is a nirvana state that few of us achieve. And collectively, for an organization to be able to foster that, to produce that, is an enormous task and an enormously important task. Now, please understand that a great culture is not the only thing you need to establish and to nurture in order to have an enviable workplace. There are lots of working parts. But culture is the first among equals. If you're going to create a best job I ever had workplace, it also requires several other important things, like benefits and compensation and an opportunity to advance and good training and PTO and a good reputation and strong communication. Many, not all of these, but many of these admirable company traits come automatically if you simply set your sights on building a one-of-a-kind, productive, best job I ever had culture. Now, it's not easy to do, but if you do that, many of these other needed ingredients for an ideal workplace come along as a corollary or a byproduct of intentionally building an enviable culture. So this is a point where we could stop to see if we have any questions yet. I'm going to move on now and drill down a little bit. We're sort of over the threshold of introduction and framing the possibility.
Thank you, Pat. Just for the audience, there's been a couple of comments here just in regards to a recording being made available of this session, which it will be. And if you'd like to ask Pat questions along the way, please do so. I'll moderate those questions through the question tab on the control panel, which everyone has on their screen. So please feel free to ask questions as we go, and we'll pepper those in at stops throughout the presentation. And we've got a little bit of time for Q&A at the end as well.
Okay. So, forging ahead here, I think that there are strong parallels between how you build a culture and how you build a brand. And while I believe that cultures are widely misunderstood, presumably we're all a bit more clear on what a brand is and how it comes about and how important a brand is. Therefore, I assume you agree that brands don't just happen. You don't leave the building and nurturing of your brand to chance or to consumers. They're handmade, carefully crafted by marketers. As marketers, we tell our consumers what our brand is and not vice versa. We don't let our consumers tell us what our brand is. Brands are not organic in that regard. And they're also not left unattended. They're constantly watched and nurtured and protected. If you don't do this, or if you let consumers tell you what your brand is, well, then you've wasted an asset and you've ended up with a dog's breakfast. The same thing is true about a company culture. You don't leave the creation of your culture to chance or to your employees in terms of its creation. It's totally on your employees to sustain it. But in terms of its creation, owners, founders, leaders decide on what the culture should be. They define it and then they build it. And they build it carefully and with great intention. And then you teach it. You transmit this to your employees, what the culture is and how they must nourish and sustain it. And this is something that you do all the time, every day. It should be your number one priority, and you should be ever vigilant about it because of the benefits that it can give one and all. Cultures are not organic. They don't happen just because the same people show up at the same place every week and do the same work. No. Cultures come about very intentionally, and they come about through very hard work, as hard as this. And owners and leaders are the only ones who can get this started, because cultures come from the top down. I cannot emphasize enough how this tired old bromide is actually essentially and foundationally true and quintessential to the making of all cultures. Everything comes from the top down in a company. This is always and inescapably. Everything that is right, smart, or good about a company is because of the owner or the founder or the leader. Period. No exceptions. Unfortunately, the opposite is true. Everything that is wrong, stupid, or bad about a company is because of the owner or the leader. Everything. Let's stop for a minute and think about the best and worst jobs you've ever had. Go ahead, think for that. Think about that really bad job that you had. Or think about the very best or very worst client experiences you've had. Now think about, if you can, or if you had any access to, the leaders of those companies with the great job that you had or the awful job, the great client experience that you had or the awful client experience. Think about the leaders of those companies. There's real linkage between leaders and what kinds of companies they produce, because it comes from the top down. Great companies have great leaders. Sucky companies have sucky, weak, or absent leaders. It's guaranteed every time, no exception. And that's because it comes from the top down. So when things come from the top down, and if you're trying to build something important, communication is the key to this. And we're going to take a little detour here, a digression about communication, because building a culture demands clear, consistent, written, and oral communications that are repeated and adhered to and modeled. And do you know what is the biggest single problem with communication? The biggest single problem with communication is the illusion that it has occurred. We all think that we're great communicators. Many of us are in the quote-unquote communication business. But the reality is the vast majority of us aren't. At best, we're poor communicators. We're not even close. There are many everyday ways that we fall short of communicating properly. But not to belabor the point, I'm going to show you 7 ways in which I think on a daily basis we're susceptible to being poor communicators. And they're not necessarily in any sort of order of importance. Oftentimes we think we've told someone something because we thought we told them it. I know I've done this. I think this happens a lot with spouses. So we've told someone something, and if it's something difficult or important, sometimes we leave out key details or difficult parts. If we have to convey bad news, we oftentimes convey 2/3 of it, and the hardest part of it we leave out, and we give ourselves a lot of slack. We say, well, I told them, I just didn't tell them the worst part. We often do this with apologies. If you have to make a really difficult apology to a friend or a spouse or a coworker, oftentimes what we do is we make 3/4 of it, and we leave the last 20, the really tough thing to admit or swallow, we leave that out. Sometimes we've told someone something very complex and important, but the message was murky because we didn't take time to craft it. Important messages need to be delivered thoughtfully. They need to be pre-thought. We told most, but not all of the people who needed to hear the message. We just assumed that the word would get out. Oh, and by the way, we assumed as the word got out that it would get transmitted flawlessly, that that person that was going to tell the other person that should have heard from you, that they were going to be able to convey it perfectly. Don't think so. So we spoke clearly, but the recipient wasn't listening carefully enough. How often does that happen? How often don't you listen carefully enough? By the way, are you listening carefully to me right now? Are you looking at some text? I don't know. Listening is a key part of communication, and we're always assuming that the recipient is listening well. That's a false assumption. So we spoke clearly, and the message was heard, but it was interpreted other than how it was intended. Now, how could that be? How could somebody interpret it differently? Once I tell you what I mean, you're going to understand fully what I meant, aren't you? Not so much. The 7th one, so we spoke clearly, and it was heard, and it was heard correctly, but we did not repeat it later, and it was lost or forgotten. Vital messages that need to be retained need to be repeated. Forgive me, but let me repeat that. Vital messages that need to be retained need to be repeated. If not, it's another form of poor or inadequate communication. Those 7 ways are ways every single day that we fail to communicate properly. That says nothing about spinning it, finessing it, or lying. We won't even go there. But how often do we spin things, which is a deliberate attempt to miscommunicate? Now, I know you didn't sign up for a communication webinar, and if we did want to talk about communication foibles and skills, we could spend way more than an hour. The point that's essential here, though, is if you don't have strong intentional communication skills and habits, and let's assume that for all of us they could be improved, if you do not have strong intentional communication skills and habits, the odds of you being able to implant and sustain a strong culture are severely impaired. So let's go back to get off of communication, get back to why you showed up here today, and that's about culture. So what is the definition of culture? I bet if I asked 6 of you, I'd get 4 different answers, and 2 of you would say something like, well, I'm not really sure how to define it. I mean, I know it when I see it. I just can't explain it. Oh, I hear that quite a bit. There are many definitions of culture, just like there are many definitions of brand. I don't pretend that this is the only or the best definition of culture, but I do contend that this is mine. My definition of culture is very nuts and bolts, and it has 2 parts, and it's not too profound. Culture is the work environment that the leader conceives and creates. The leader, owner, founder decides, what kind of workplace do I want this to be? The other part of it, of culture, is the way all employees collectively understand that owner's vision, embrace it, and behave. Behavior is key here. Another way to think about culture is that culture is like the operating system of an organization. It guides how an organization acts or behaves. So let's stop here just for a second and repeat. Culture has 2 parts. Part 1 is what the leader decides he wants the work environment to be and how he goes about establishing that, instilling it, installing it. And it has to be with the employees understanding it, embracing it, and behaving in the prescribed way. Those 2 things have to take place in order for a culture to be formed. Again, it guides how an organization acts or behaves. So now, as a way of understanding what culture is, let's stop for a minute and talk about what culture is not, or what it's often confused with, because I spend a lot of time working with people on culture, and we spend a fair amount of time undoing or taking them away from places where they think culture lives. Your culture is not your mission statement. It is not your personality. It is not your positioning. And most importantly, it's not the perks or customs that come along with benefits. Let's drill down a little bit on each one of these. Mission statement. So, okay, I confess to a bias against mission statements. Frankly, I think most of them are bullshit. In my 40 years in the ad business, I guess conservatively I've been exposed to or worked with 350 to 400 different mission statements. I can tell you unequivocally that all of them were equally well-intentioned, and almost all of them were way too much built on generic puffery, and they are insufferably lofty and impractical. I once heard a venture capitalist at a presentation say that he never met a pro forma he didn't like. You know, VCs spend their days, week in and week out, being presented with glowing, optimistic financial pro formas from startups that are starving for cash. They all have bulletproof, too good to be true futures, hence the rosy pro formas. All pro formas, when presented to VCs, are surefire money winners. Yet less than 2% of new ideas presented to VCs actually bear real fruit. I confess to having the same feeling about mission statements. I never met one I didn't like, but I've run across precious few that are truly inspirational and helpful, truly directive. Few mission statements are focused enough or directed enough. They all suffer from, well, what's not to like? A truly good mission statement can be very helpful. It can serve as the company's lofty goal on the distant horizon, but it's not your culture. A strong culture can help you achieve your mission statement, but no matter how well crafted your mission statement is, it is not your culture and it's far from it. How about personalities? A company's personality is external. A company's culture is internal. Your personality is your packaging. It's tying yourself up in the fancy paper with the nice bow. It's how you want to present yourself to the outside. Your culture, again, is internal, and it's your substance and your soul. Oftentimes, people tell me that their personality and their culture are the same, or that they're very tightly aligned. In most cases, they're not. In some cases, they can be close, but in most cases, they're not. Disney, I think, is a great example of this. If you've ever worked with or for Disney or read about them, you know that their company culture is, I would imagine, is extremely tough-minded. It's driven. It's very competitive. They have a take-no-prisoners way of competing, and they compete very well. They have a very successful culture in that regard. But the Disney personality drafts off their entertainment vein and their theme parks. Their personality is that it's the happiest place on earth. No real match between that culture of take no prisoners and the personality of happiest place on earth. And this is the case with many, many companies. But an important distinction here, while your culture is internal and it works behind the scenes, it can have a very big impact on how you are viewed from the outside, because you perform better with a strong culture. You produce results with a strong culture. So while it is an internal thing and it's a private family matter, if you will, it produces results for you, and that gets noticed in the marketplace with your customers, with your clients, and with your competitors. How about a positioning statement? I think positioning statements are very important to a business, to a company's success, particularly in the agency business, but they are not your culture. I think your positioning should be the answer to the question. If a prospect says, why should I hire you? Why should I team up with you? That's the way you answer that question is your positioning. And it's often a very tough question to answer honestly or effectively. In the agency industry, as far as I'm concerned, we've struggled mightily for years to differentiate ourselves in a meaningful way from one another. Frankly, few of us do it. We're really all the same. I believe that an intelligent, relevant, and achievable positioning statement and a strong culture are the cornerstones for a company's offerings to its employees and to its customers. And way more effective, way more practical, way more directed than a mission statement. Your positioning statement and your culture are your reason for being and your roadmap to achieving goals. Let me repeat that. Your positioning and your culture is really are your reasons for being, and they are your roadmap to achieve the goals that you want. So lastly, but most importantly, your culture is not to be confused with perks or company rituals, and it too often is. I would say that 75% of the time when I ask employees to tell me about, to define or explain their culture, I get answers that have to do with what are their perks or their rituals. Letting pets come to the office every third Friday is not your culture, nor is free soda in the vending machine, or the fact that you get to do these naughty double entendre t-shirts for the company picnic. And it's really great that they let you dress up in lavish costumes on Halloween and wear them all day long, but that's not your culture. Your culture is much more fundamental, permanent, and substantive than these perks. And the fact that employees can't describe their culture, I don't think is their fault, because I do think that cultures are underutilized and misunderstood, and I don't think that leaders talk about their culture. They just assume that it lives osmotically. All these perks and rituals and customs are good and positive, and they can have a positive impact on morale, but they do not have a systemic and pervasive, they do not have the same systemic and pervasive power that a strong intentional culture has. So, how do you get a culture? Where does the culture come from? Well, cultures start with values and they end with behavior. So, what are values? What do you mean by values, and why are they important? And so because cultures, I think, are ignored or misunderstood, values, which are really the building blocks of your culture, are misunderstood, or they're often undervalued. I'm going to, in the next slide, give you 3 sentences that could sum up pretty much this 60-minute presentation. Culture is the sum total of behavior. I think we've touched upon that a little bit. Behavior is how we achieve our goals. Our values are guideposts for behavior. Again, culture is nothing more and everything but the sum total of the behavior of everyone in the organization. When we behave in a prescribed way, we increase the odds that we're going to achieve our goals. And the way we behave, how we should behave, is defined by our values. Your culture is a belief system in how to behave. And values tell us how to behave. We're going to stop for a little bit here and talk about behavior because I think it's something that is critically important and not really parsed out. I think that behavior is the overlooked linchpin to results and success. And a little bit of a digression here, but I think we need to hire, promote, discipline, reward, and terminate based on people's behavior, as much or more so based on their results, or their resume, or their traits and characteristics. As leaders, we need to cultivate, train, monitor, nurture, correct behavior, and the results will follow. Behavior, not traits or experience or style, leads to results. You know, on the surface, this may seem very self-evident, sort of a duh, but I think we generally have our eye on results and a person's personality and traits. When we fall short of goals, oftentimes we look for blame, but we don't look for what behavior was missing that could have gotten us there. When we interview, critically, we almost never interview for behavior. You know, there's three key parts to interviewing candidates. There's the resume, there are references, and then there's the personal interview. The resume tells you nothing about behavior. The personal interview most of the time tells you nothing about behavior because we don't ask those kinds of questions. We don't try to get to the behavior core of people. Behavior is critical to achieving goals, and it's something that we don't think about front and center. So, how do we get to behavior, though? Behavior is based on values. So what are values? So we just talked about values are things that we value that prescribe our behavior. They are not situation neutral, they're not personnel neutral, and they're not client neutral. They are touchstones to define behavior. So what do we mean by that? Well, our values should be permanent, and we don't let them slide, or we don't look the other way because the issue or the crisis du jour involves our biggest client or our most valued or most demanding employee. So we have a senior level employee who's very important to everything that we do, and they work with our largest client, and their behavior is unacceptable, or in ways they behave at times outside of our values. But we look the other way because they're such an important employee. You know, I think that values tell us how to behave regardless of the situation, regardless of who the client is, regardless of who the employee is, regardless of how hot it gets in the kitchen. Values tell us how to behave. Values are a compass for how we behave. And when you do that, how we behave has everything to do with whether we succeed or fail. There is real strong linkage here. Values determine how we behave. When we behave in the prescribed way, we will achieve the results that we set out. And when we achieve the results, we hit our goals. That's how we're more profitable. That's how we're a company that people want to come and work for. That's how we retain people. That's how we have a competitive edge, that we meet our goals and we deliver results. Well, we do that because of how we behave. And how we behave is prescribed from the top down by the values that we set in the organization. So values aren't just window dressing. Values aren't something that we put on a laminated card and it's on everybody's desk. Values are things that we live because values are how we behave. And behave again. There's real linkage. So this is another place that we could stop if there's any questions about this, because we're starting to wade into some meatier stuff, and I don't want to go too fast.
Thanks, Pat. And just as a reminder to everyone, there's you can ask questions to Pat through the questions tab. We've got one here from John. Pat, in your research on the subject, have you come across any documented linkage between stronger company cultures and higher customer loyalty? Seems like there's a connective tissue there, but wondering if it has ever been documented.
The answer to that question is I have not come across that research yet. I would be surprised if it doesn't exist because it seems to me to be a very logical linkage, but I haven't come across a study about linking it to customer loyalty.
There was a just from my experience on the topic, John, there's the guys who run the NPR or Net Promoter Score have done quite a bit of research around this as I understand it, on the cultural side, looking to develop culture to influence advocacy. That's the strongest tie or connective tissue that I've seen.
Okay.
Just as I was saying before, John's question there, that we'll leave some time at the end for other questions as we go, and Pat, back to you.
Okay. So I think that companies, because the values are so important and that they're situation neutral and client neutral and personnel neutral, that means that they don't get updated every year. They're pretty much written in stone. They're not quite eternal and immutable, but they're close to it. You don't update values annually, just like true north doesn't get recalibrated on a compass. Now here's the dirty little secret that's not so little. We as leaders, owners, founders, whether you're the leader of the company or the leader of a department, you need to show your employees how to behave if you have any hope of them behaving like you want them to. Whatever behaviors you want to encourage, and the behaviors you want to encourage are rooted in your values. Whatever behaviors you want to encourage, you have to model them. Enron literally chiseled its 4 values in stone, literally, in the frieze of its lobby, its vaulted ceiling in this gigantic marble and granite lobby. And they chiseled in stone, like 18 inches tall, what their 4 values were. I don't remember all 4, I must confess, but I do know that one of them was integrity. So Enron had their values at the top of their lobby, but sadly that's where they stayed. And they can't stay there. The values start with the owners and they have to come from the top down. Employees will always do what you do. They will watch your behavior and they will take cues. They will take their cues from that, not from what you say or write. And this is going to get a bit repetitive, but leaders are the headwaters when it comes to a company's values. You need to plant them, nurture them, protect them, promulgate them. You must not only live them, though, you must champion them. If you're going to find yourself in a situation where your company has a set of values, but you're not familiar with them, or you don't necessarily buy into them because you just inherited them, or people frankly haven't valued them, if you're not really into one of your values, you as a leader aren't going to live that value. You can't lead the charge on it. Then it becomes a wasted value because you don't have an infinite number of values. It becomes a wasted value, and more dangerously, it's a way for you to expose yourself as a fake. Employees can see it and smell it when you don't live a value. Employees can see it and smell it when you behave outside the values. Because it comes from the top down, you're modeling it, whether you want to or not. That comes with the territory. And yes, it is up to you to get it started, but again, it's not all on you because we talked about culture has 2 parts. A strong culture cannot happen without the leader living it and modeling it. No exceptions. And a strong culture cannot get accomplished and sustained without employees following the lead. So I mentioned a few minutes ago about a wasted value and being careful about choosing what your values are. Let's presume that as you listen to this presentation or you go away and you think about it, that you don't really have clearly agreed upon values for your company, or you'd like to change them and be more thoughtful about them. I would suggest that you should look to end up with somewhere between 5 to 8 values. Totally arbitrary. That's the Pat Doody suggestion. But I've found that you probably should have more than 2 and less than 12. And since you have a finite number of values, you must be smart and parsimonious about each and every one. Take your time in choosing them because you're going to have to champion them. Mull them over. Debate them. Bounce them off trusted advisors who know you and know your company. But don't waste a value. Don't put a straw dog in there. Well, what does that mean? If if you've only got 6 or 8 values to work with, don't use one up on something like integrity. That's not to suggest that integrity isn't important. It's in fact an a priori. But really, if you're going to, would you intentionally hire someone who is dishonest, or would you tolerate, much less keep an employee who has no integrity? Of course not. If you knew someone was a cheat, a lie, a thief, would you keep them in the company? Then I think you don't need a value that says, let's be truthful. Why would we not be truthful? So think about what's an a priori, and don't use that on a value. If you have to instruct people or remind people to be honest, and one of the things we do with values is that we instruct and remind all the time. If you have people that you have to instruct and remind all the time not to be honest, then you shouldn't hire them. In fact, you should keep away from them. It's kind of the equivalent of saying, like, well, you know, one of our values here is that we don't set coworkers on fire. Okay, that's a good thing. Don't set coworkers on fire. But really, do you need to tell people that murder isn't allowed in the office? I think the same thing is true about integrity and honesty and professionalism. When we set about to prescribe our values at WONGDOODY, we went off-site and spent a half a day thinking what we wanted our values to be. And we ended up with 7 values. We did this about 2 years into the organization because it took me 2 years to figure out that, in fact, values needed to be codified. And we identified 7 values, and they are still our 7 values to this day. But we looked at 30 values or more, and these were some of the ones that we cast aside. These are not part of our values. One is creativity. Creativity is a trait, we think. It's not a behavior. And remember, you want to be certain that your values are behavior-based, that they lead to behavior. You can't lead somebody to being creative. It's a talent or a trait that people have, so it's not a behavior. It's very, very important for an advertising agency. For lots of companies, creativity is important. That's not to say this isn't important, but it's not a value. I'm particularly grateful that we left out winning. You folks probably don't know Tracy Wong firsthand, but he's one of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. He wants to win every new business pitch. He wants to win every argument with me. Tracy's a basketball nut. He exercises 4 or 5 days a week by playing basketball. You don't play a friendly game of pickup basketball with Tracy Wong. A friendly game of pickup basketball is an oxymoron for him. This is the last person who tried to play that friendly game of pickup basketball. But even though he's incredibly competitive, we don't have winning as a value. And that's because if we did, it would say that winning was the most important thing. If that's the case, then I guess anything that you did to win could be tolerated, maybe even justified, like cheating or lying or stealing, just as long as we win, right? No, you can't have values that justify the means. So, and to repeat, the only way to influence employees' behavior is to model it. You have to live the values. So, Mr. or Ms. CEO, if you're a bad listener, then guess what? That behavior is not valued. Your employees can be bad. Your direct reports, your senior managers can be bad listeners. If you don't meet deadlines, then I guess being late is okay. If you're a bully, expect your senior managers to bully their direct reports. If you don't participate in annual strategic planning, then planning isn't important. What you do sets the record, whether you want it or not. Strong leaders do what is important, and they do it the right way. Unfortunately, the opposite is also true. You can expect flawed results from flawed behaviors. So I think you might see where this is headed. And again, now I'm sort of addressing owners and leaders and founders. But if you're running a large department, I think you can see where this is headed. In fact, it's pretty diabolical, and it's pretty onerous. Installing a first-rate culture is not do as I say. It's do as I do. In order to install an enviable, competitive advantage type of culture, you have to improve. That's right. You have to be a better leader, a better boss, a better coworker, a better person. That's the price of admission and the hurdle here to establishing a strong culture. You not only have to identify the values, Mr. CEO, you have to live them. You have to model them. And you have to understand that you want people to do as you do. After that, the next best way to influence employees' behavior is how you react to their behavior. Cultures are all about how people behave. What you need to do then is to monitor behavior. Not characteristics, not traits, not talents. You monitor behavior. What does that mean? You watch for both good and bad behaviors. You comment on the behaviors when they are good and when they are bad. You praise the right behaviors, that you don't let them go unnoticed or unrewarded. And you discipline wayward behaviors swiftly. You don't let them go unnoticed. You don't let them go unpunished. And then guess what? You rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. Monitoring employee behavior as it relates to your values, which is your culture, is a task that you and all senior leaders need to do every day, because behaviors are all that matter. So now another cornerstone for establishing cultures is that once you've established the values, you have to write them down. You literally write them down in many places. And then you not only have to write them down, but you have to commit to them publicly and speak to them publicly. Values cannot just live, though, in the employee manual or on a poster in the lunchroom or chiseled in stone in the lobby. In my work with clients, almost all will tell me that they have company-wide values. I ask them what they are, and if they stumble, I ask them if the values are written down anywhere. Most of the time, they aren't written down. If you don't have them written down, how do you expect employees to know what they are? And if employees don't know what your values are, how are they expected to behave? Remember what we said about the biggest single problem with communication, that it was the illusion that it's occurred? I've met plenty of very good, earnest leaders who really believe their companies have values, and they believe their employees, by and large, know them and live by them. How does that happen if you haven't written them down? And how does that happen if your employees can't play them back to you? That's where that communication piece comes in.
Pat, can I jump in there for a moment? There's a couple of questions on the topic that thought it would be a good point to jump in.
Sure.
So a question here from George. What did you do briefly to ensure that the culture of your Seattle office carried over to Culver City office? And how do you infuse a culture into an acquired agency? So some of that may require a longer explanation, but...
Yeah. So to the first part about that, one of the three owners, by the time we had a Los Angeles agency, we also had a third partner, and he was part of the team of three of us that put the values together and established the culture. So he was the top-down guy in LA, and he was responsible for carrying the values through, carrying the behavior through. I can tell you that our Seattle office and our LA offices are very different. They have a completely different set of clients. They have different leaders at the top. Two of the three owners are in Seattle. One of the owners is down in LA, but he's a very different guy than we are. The average age of the employee in LA is probably 10 years younger than the average age of the employee in Seattle. Los Angeles is a decidedly different market than Seattle, geography, place to live, than Seattle is. And we have completely different clients in each office. So the offices are very different on many, many measurements, and they feel different when you walk in. But the way employees behave, we're able to carry the culture down there because we talk about these are the behaviors that we value, and by the way, these are some behaviors that we don't value. So we don't try to. It's impossible to make, I think, satellite offices be cookie cutters of one another. They're going to be different because they're growing in different markets. But the kinds of behavior that you want from your employees can be communicated, can be modeled from office to office to office.
And I think that, from that, Pat, the connection there is that, certainly during an acquisition, the swift and direct nature of providing and communicating values and the behaviors that are recognized in the organization would therefore be paramount.
Right, but this is a task that can be years in the making. Just because you establish your values and try to model behaviors, particularly if in an acquisition, if you're trying to meld two different organizations, we all know how difficult that is and what the odds of success are of being able to do that. If you bring it back, though, to foundationally to valued behaviors, that's a start. But you have to recognize that it needs to be modeled by all top-down by the employer and his senior managers. And that could take a long time to teach some, in an acquired company, it could take a long time to teach some old dogs new tricks. And maybe they don't buy into the values, and that's problematic because they're going to model behaviors that aren't aligned with the values that you've established. Therefore, the cultures can't be in sync. And frankly, if you're interested in the values, in the benefit of a strong culture, you cannot tolerate senior level people who don't embrace and model the values.
So a great next question, and we'll jump forward from this, and we'll leave a few more minutes at the end for some other questions that are here. Pat, can you give us an example of a good value in your opinion and why you consider it a good value?
So I get asked all the time, what are WONGDOODY's 7 values? And I always say, I will tell you what they are, but they should not be your values because you're not the same leader that Tracy Wong and Pat Doody were when they set up these values 20 years ago. One of our most difficult values to live is to be direct. We talk about if we could be direct with one another all the time, courteous, professional, but be direct, then we'd spend a lot less time miscommunicating. So one of the implications of being direct is that if you have a problem with another employee and you come to me and say, I got this problem, what should we do about this? What you will hear me say is our values say that you need to go and talk to that person about the problem. And they say, I can't do that. He doesn't talk to me, or I hate his guts. I want to kill him. I don't want to talk to him. I want to kill him. Well, killing is not one of our values, for starters. But I will say to that person, I'm going to tell you once more that it's our belief that we need to be direct with one another and that we need to have a work environment here where we can communicate directly with people that we might have issues with. If you can't do that, I'll have both of you come into my office and we'll hash through this, and I will try to get us some resolution. And I can pretty much guarantee you that you aren't going to like my resolution as much as you're going to like the one that you're going to do, that you're going to affect on your own. You're going to have more ownership if you could do this to the other employee. Being direct also means that if you screwed up and you got to go tell your boss that you made a mistake and it was a bad mistake, you don't go and sugarcoat it, you don't spin it, you don't finesse it. If you ever catch yourself saying to yourself, holy shit, how am I going to tell Mary this? Right away you're starting to be indirect. Right away you're starting to miscommunicate. How can I say this in a fashion that isn't going to make her explode or make her cut my head off? When in fact Mary needs to know the situation as clearly and directly as she can. That's another manifestation of being direct. We try to deal as best we can with what are the facts, and we deal courteously with one another. But we face the bad, stupid, ugly shit as directly and as honestly and as openly as we can, and we don't spin it.
Thank you, Pat.
So, okay, I'm up here and talking about that. Again, I've talked before about the importance of communication in installing the values. So, and it does come from the top down, but then the second part of the definition is that cultures are also the collective behavior of all employees. And there's linkage across, down, up, around all employees to get this collective behavior. When employees collectively behave according to the company's prescribed values, that creates a culture. You know what it also does, interestingly, is it levels the playing field among employees. Different generations, different personality types, different folks can work together more effectively when and if they all march to the beat of the culture drum. Because regardless of your individual boomer, X, Y, or millennial generation tribe, if you live in a strong company culture, you should know how to act. And you should know what behaviors are valuable and valued. And so just because you don't get the 48-year-old and he doesn't know what a hashtag is, and by the way, at the end of this presentation, would someone please tell me what a hashtag is? It doesn't mean that you can't work effectively with that person because of the behaviors that your culture defines. Now here's a really important part, is that employees don't get to choose between adhering to the culture or high performance. You have to do both. Cultures need to be designed to support and fuel performance. They are not window dressing. Culture doesn't come at the price of reduced performance. Quite opposite is true. A strong culture gets you strong performances. If you don't meet your performance goals as an employee, you can't get a hall pass and say, well, I'm really, really good with the culture and everybody likes me. Similarly, if you meet all your performance goals, if you are the best, if you're the employee of the month in terms of reaching your goals, but you are a turd in the punch bowl, you're a toxin. You're a bad culture fit. Your performance is irrelevant if you're a cancer. So that's the way that employees have to understand the benefit and the obligation that culture is for them. Now, I'm about to I'm getting close to the ending here, and I'm going to take this to a different place in the last 5 minutes. But as Dave said, we've got time for questions at the end. I'm going to turn this on its head a little bit and look at culture from the bottom up. Obviously, I have been talking about the fact that coming from the top down, the culture can benefit the owner handsomely. And it can benefit all the employees because of a great work environment. But I have been talking a lot about the cultures are formed by the owners, and this is a top-down enterprise. That doesn't mean, though, that you can't think about cultures from the bottom up, from the employee's perspective. And when you look at this, all from the employee's perspective, from the bottom up, well, I must confess that things can get a little preachy. In the early 70s, in Chicago, there was a Chicago media celebrity named Studs Terkel. He was also a social historian. He wrote this book called Working, and it was sort of a seminal piece of American sociology. Terkel conducted hundreds of interviews among Midwesterners, mostly blue-collar types and lower-income types, on how they felt about their work and their lives. It was a fascinating and sobering sociological study. One of the most quoted, now it's a little bit folly to try to summarize a whole book in a book of this magnitude in a single sentence, but one of the most quoted and scrutinized findings from the study was the fact that one of the workers interviewed told Studs Terkel that most of us have jobs that are too small for our spirits. This became kind of a summary point and rallying cry for the whole book, and for many, it captured the working man's plight in America in the early 70s. It became a statement about class. It became a statement about management and labor. Well, I think that this thing, although this was done in the early 70s, I think this has great applicability today if we're truly genuine about leading and building cultures. I believe that we as leaders and shepherds of our companies have a real obligation for the good of our companies and for the good of our employees. We need to grow people's spirits through their work. For the good of our companies and as well as for the good of our employees, we need to grow people's spirits through their work. We need to make their work meaningful. We need to give their lives gratification through their work. I think this is not only a noble thought, I think it's an obligation from strong leaders. At the same time that Terkel did this book, there's a poet, actually a novelist and a poet in the Midwest named Marge Piercy. She wrote a poem that was entitled To Be of Use. The poem was about, basically about the common everyday laborer. The last two verses of that poem, I think, relate to what I'm talking about here in terms of the obligation that we have to grow people's spirits through their work. Marge Piercy's last two verses of To Be of Use are, the work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil and Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums. But you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. I think as leaders, we owe it to our employees to give them work that is bigger than their spirits, to give them work that is real. I think the best way to do that is through a strong culture that is inspired, intentional, and envied. So there's a lot to think about there. And before we take questions, in the last minute here, I'm going to give you the speed read version of this. I'm going to go through some slides that sort of summarize the whole thing. Strong cultures deliver overall workplace excellence, better business results, happier, healthier employees. The definition of culture. Your culture is the work environment that you conceive and create, Mr. CEO, leader, founder, and And it is the collective behavior of all your employees embracing those values. It comes from the top down. Everything that is good or bad about your company is on you. Everything. You cannot have a strong culture without regular, direct, clear, repeated communications. The biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has occurred, and you will today miscommunicate multiple times. I can guarantee it. Sorry. Culture is all about behavior. Behavior is how we achieve results. Values guide and inform behavior. The only way leaders can instill desired behavior is to model it. You are what you do. We all deserve work that is bigger than our spirits. Oh yeah, and then there is this that that good presentations are always better with a little eye candy. So we're done.
Thank you very much, with the questions that we've dropped in the middle about bang on time. So thank you for those who've stayed on. We will follow through and promise to get to a couple of questions. So of the questions that we don't get to, we'll make sure that we follow up directly. Pat will reach out directly to answer these questions. If you do have some that you'd like to ask now through the Q&A tab on the control panel, please do so. Pat, I'm going to jump through a couple here right away. So one from Beverly Wright. Do you feel that culture/positioning is a major decision factor with clients?
I think that positioning is a major decision factor with clients because, as I said before, in my opinion, the positioning answers the question, why should I hire you? Why should I work with you? Or it answers the question, why are you better than your noble competitor? That's what positioning is. Your culture is internal. I don't think that agencies, in my opinion, agencies in the new business process, in the pitching process, shouldn't sell their culture. What they should sell is their results and the work that they do. And hopefully the work that you do and the results that you get for clients is because you have a strong culture. But your culture is it's family business. It's internal. And a client's culture is going to be different than your culture. And he's not hiring you for your culture. He's hiring you for your talents and for your results. But you'll have better results with a stronger culture.
Great. So there's a question here. I'll summarize to, are we saying that a culture must be created by a dictatorship versus democracy? And how do you get it to permeate in a company where the world is saying individual values are paramount versus the collective?
Values are much more determined by, if my choice is between a dictatorship or a democracy, I choose dictatorship. There's room in the middle for a leader to consult with trusted advisors and senior level people. What you don't do is sit down with 50 people and say, what are our values? Because it needs to be, again, the leader needs to be able to say, these are, in fact, my values. I can model these. I can champion these. These will create the kind of company that I want. And you get to that with a smaller group of people. You can get input from senior level people or key advisors or people who know you, but you don't put out an employee survey and say, what would you think our 7 values should be? Because it's like, again, it's like building a brand. You don't let your customers decide what your brand is. You don't let your employees decide what the culture is, because it has to be you want to make the company into your vision, and the employees need to be then educated, taught, trained, cajoled, supported to live those values to get to that vision.
Right, one more question here, Pat, then we'll wrap up and provide answers to other questions directly one-on-one. This sort of follows in the same vein. Why would you want to see value in separating internal culture to external brand? Shouldn't they go hand in hand to reinforce one another in this very transparent world like Zappos, Starbucks, Southwest, etc.?
So again, I think that the brand has to do with how you present the product, and the brand needs to have be very prescribed. But the brand is sort of the packaging, and it's very important packaging. Culture is about behaviors. Again, if I go back to the Disney example, the Disney culture, I believe, is real no-nonsense, real hardcore, take-no-prisoners, smart, tough marketing. I think the Disney brand is that it's the happiest place on earth. I don't think Disney would want its culture to be linked up and synced up with its brand. And I think that the culture, while I don't know it firsthand, I think that the culture of Starbucks is quite different than the culture of Starbucks, the place that you go in as a third place and sit and have your coffee. Very strong brand that Starbucks has, very well articulated. The people, though, who work at Starbucks and how they achieve their results and how they create a workplace environment has some real differences versus the in-store environment that you find when you're getting your latte.
Thank you very much, Pat. Certainly some key points that should hammer home to the audience here. We've got a number of agency, ad tech, and media CEOs, presidents, and VPs who manage large teams, as well as people who are on those teams. And I think that you've certainly been able to give us some things to think about and take away today to ponder as we go into the week ahead and months ahead. For everyone that's here, we have, as I've noted up front, we will be providing a recorded version of this session through a follow-up email after this. It'll also be posted to the List blog, and of course you've got the transcript availability there with Pat's email directly. Thank you so much for tuning into this culture session, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the weeks ahead. Thank you very much to Pat and Doody, and we will take it down from there.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody. Good luck. Go build great cultures.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.